They say deep inside the canals of Xochimilco in Mexico, there is an island where nightmares live, not in shadows, not in spirits alone, but in the wide, cracked faces of dolls. Every tree, every wall, every hut drips with broken toys. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, dolls with missing eyes, dolls with rotting skin, dolls that whisper in the wind. And this is not just a legend. This is a place you can actually visit. A place the locals fear. A place called Isla de las Muñecas, the island of the dolls. Before we go further into the story, like the video, subscribe the channel and press the bell icon. But what most people don't know is the story of those who went there, thinking it was just another tourist attraction. The story of three friends, Daniel, Rebecca, and Luis, who stepped onto that cursed ground and never returned the same. Daniel had always been the skeptic, the one who rolled his eyes at ghost stories. Rebecca was the curious one, with a camera slung around her neck, always chasing strange legends. And Luis believed. He had grown up hearing whispers from his grandmother about the dolls, about the girl who drowned, about the man who tried to keep her spirit at peace by hanging dolls in her honor. Luis knew the warnings, but he never thought he'd see them come true. The boat ride to the island was silent, except for the creak of the wooden oars and the occasional splash of water. A fog curled across the canals, thick and suffocating. The closer they got, the colder the air became, as though the sun itself refused to touch that cursed soil. And then, they saw them. Dolls, hundreds of them dangling from branches, their heads lolling, their arms outstretched. Some were burned, some were headless, some were nothing but torsos with glassy eyes still watching. Rebecca lifted her camera to snap a picture, but the sound of the shutter seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing off the trees as though the dolls themselves were listening. "This is it," Daniel whispered. "Just creepy junk, nothing more." But Luis shook his head. "Don't mock them. They say the dolls move at night. That they whisper to each other. That they're waiting for new souls." Rebecca laughed nervously, but she couldn't stop staring. Because she swore, just for a second, that one of the dolls' heads had turned to follow her. They reached the center of the island, where a small shack stood covered in more dolls, nailed to the walls, strung from the roof, sitting in broken windowsills. Inside the shack, the air smelled of mildew, rot, and something metallic, like dried blood. In the corner sat the oldest doll of them all, with one eye missing, the other clouded with dust. Its tiny hands were wrapped around a rusted crucifix. Luis stepped closer, whispering, "That's the one. The doll that belonged to the girl who drowned. The one the caretaker kept closest to her spirit." And that's when the air changed. The wind died, the trees stopped rustling, the entire island fell into silence, except for a faint giggle. A child's giggle. Rebecca dropped her camera. Daniel spun around, his voice cracking. "Who's there?" But there was no one. Only dolls, dozens of them, hanging, swaying slowly though the air was still. Their eyes, those glassy, lifeless eyes, seemed to glimmer in unison, as though something behind them was watching. Rebecca backed up and stumbled over something soft. When she looked down, her breath caught in her throat. It was a doll, but fresh. Its porcelain face was cracked, and a red smear dripped from its lips like blood. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the fog. And then, the dolls began to whisper. Hundreds of tiny voices, chanting, giggling, murmuring in Spanish. Luis clutched his head, falling to his knees. They're calling us to stay." The shack door slammed shut behind them. Daniel pounded on it, but the wood wouldn't budge. Rebecca's flashlight flickered, cutting through the darkness in bursts. And in those bursts, the dolls moved. Closer, their heads tilting, arms twitching. One fell from the ceiling with a thud and crawled toward her with jerky, unnatural movements. Rebecca screamed again, but it was too late. Dozens of tiny porcelain hands grabbed her ankles, pulling, dragging her into the shadows. Her cries grew muffled, then cut off completely. Daniel spun around, his eyes wide with terror. "Where is she?" But the only answer he got was the sound of snapping strings as more dolls dropped from above. Luis whispered, his voice breaking, "We shouldn't have come. The girl's spirit, she needs more dolls. More souls." Daniel grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him. "We're getting out of here. Do you hear me?" But when Luis lifted his face, his eyes were no longer his own. They were glassy, doll-like, lifeless. And then, Daniel was alone. The whispers grew louder. The dolls giggled, their teeth clicking, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Daniel stumbled backward, tripping over more broken toys, until he hit the wall. In front of him, the oldest doll, the one clutching the crucifix, slowly turned its head. Its jaw cracked open, and in a child's voice, it whispered, "Stay with us." The last thing Daniel saw before the light went out was every doll on the island turning their heads toward him, their eyes glowing red. The next morning, tourists passed through the canals. They said the island looked the same. Dolls hanging, swaying, silent. But if you looked closely, very closely, you might notice 3 new dolls hanging in the trees. One with Daniel's crooked smile, one with Rebecca's camera dangling from its neck, and one with Luis's trembling hands frozen in prayer. They say Isla de las Muñecas is just a story, just a legend. But those who've been there know the truth. The dolls are waiting, and once they have your face, you'll never leave.